first thing I want to point out is that my email address is wrong. I do have my cards over there. It should be Karyn.Searcy@Terry, T-E-R-I, Incorporated, INC.org. And I know that we're short on time, so I'm going to talk as briefly as possible. I've been editing my PowerPoint in my head as everybody else is speaking. Mine is really different than the other presentations that are being done. Mine's more about what you as parents can be doing to advocate for speech and language programs and supports for your children. And after being here yesterday and talking in the cottage with the families, I'm finding the same patterns of misinformation about speech and language services throughout the diagnosis. So that's why years ago, Dr. Montgomery, who's a neurologist who was here yesterday, he and I presented a presentation on Beyond the Diagnosis. I don't know anything about CDG other than what I've learned this weekend, but I do know what it's like to have a child that can't communicate because I've been working in the field for 45 years. And the most important thing is for you to be able to communicate with your child and to be able to advocate to get services that your child needs. I'm not going to have time to go through all my slides. I do have a handout that is going to be emailed to everybody who's registered in the course, and you're more than welcome to email me anytime. Somebody sent me their IEP yesterday, and I was able to go through it and just give some suggestions on what to do in terms of talking to the school districts. I do a lot of work with parents and advocates on getting more services for their children here in San Diego. And I have a lot of experience in writing goals because I teach at San Diego State, and this is my 10th year. The last thing I'm going to say that's commercially motivated is every year my company puts on a program called I Can Bike. It's from a national organization on the East Coast, and they send out a fleet of bicycles and an instructor and a floor manager to teach children with developmental disabilities to ride bikes independently. That doesn't happen 100% of the time, but 80% of our children do ride independently. We can handle 40 children per year, and this will be our 10th year. It's in May, and we help you raise money or get full sponsorships for your children. The program is called I Can Bike, and it's a national organization. You can Google it online, and I highly recommend it. It's available throughout the country. Okay. This is just a real brief description of what speech and language is. This came up yesterday with Dr. Montgomery. We should be called language and speech therapists rather than speech and language therapists. We still get people calling us and saying, I don't know why I would go for speech therapy for my child because he's not talking. The language part is the most important. And yesterday somebody said to me that their caseworker through the regional center had told them that their child was eligible for physical therapy, eligible for occupational therapy, but not for speech and language therapy because they were not cognitively ready or showing signs of readiness. That is unethical. It is not supported by the American Speech and Hearing Association, and it makes no sense at all. Children begin relating to parents or to caregivers from birth, and you need to be in there knowing what to do from the beginning. If you have a speech and language therapist that is not allowing you to be part of that process, ask for a new speech and language therapist. I've done a lot of research in the last 12 years on parents of children who are at risk for autism, and we have a program here in San Diego called Project Impact for Toddlers, and we get children in at 12 months old, and we work directly with their parents. The whole concept is you as parents can coach the therapist on your family dynamics and what works for you and your child, and that therapist can coach you on what strategies you can trial. But it's got to be a reciprocal relationship between you and the therapist, and your child is in between. So going back to this, because I go off on tangents and I don't have time, These are the elements of speech that are important, sound production being the least important. We can get other ways of communicating, and if I had time, I'd show you a video of a 6-month-old baby and the interaction with the mom, and you know that there's so much that is prior to the development of speech and prior to the development of language. I put this slide in because I get a little frustrated with therapists who talk about best practices. Best practices used to have 3 elements. It was the family dynamics and what is important to the family. It is the experience of the speech and language therapist. And thirdly, it's the research. And I really do believe in research, and I'm very much about data collection, but those are the 3 elements. More recently, they've added a 4th element, and that's feasibility of implementation. If you live in Appalachia and your children are playing in a chicken coop, feasibility of implementation is going to look a lot different than if you're sitting in a clinical setting. Stimulating language strategies, these are the 3 elements that I look at when I'm working with children. I want to use signs and gestures because I can help a child do that. I want to work on sound imitation because that's important to teach children from a very early age that we need to have them imitating what we're modeling. And we also need for families to hear their children's voices. That's so important. And then the last element is engagement through music and play. Very quickly, I'm going to go through my how to avoid power struggles. These are things that I learned back in the 70s when I first started working with children. We don't ask questions, we make statements. If we come into a therapy setting and we say to a child, do you want to come play with me? Or if we come into your home and say, you want to come play with me? What's the child likely to say? No, not interested at all, bye. We just gave them a choice that's not really a choice. So we make statements, let's go play. Also from a linguistic perspective, it's very important that you know children develop an ability to decode questions much later than they can decode statements. Make it a statement. Always push one step past what a child wants to do, because children, it's very difficult to communicate when it's not developing naturally, automatically. So a child is going to get frustrated and want to stop trying. We just want to progressively increase their tolerance for that challenge, and we push one step and then all done. So if I have a 15-piece puzzle that I want the child to label the pieces for, and after the second piece, she's really not interested, then I say one more, then all done. And we've gotten 3 pieces. And then the next time, hopefully 4. Never ask children to do something you can't help them do. That's a very frightening thing for a child if I say, stick out your tongue, and the child can't. The child now gets the message that this adult can't help me. And that's very frightening. Also, the other part of that could be I say, stick out your tongue, and the child says, yeah, well, make me. Or you can't make me. I'm not going to go in there and grab the tongue. And the child learns pretty quickly, I don't have to do what she tells me to do. So we're going to make sure that we're going to pair everything we want the child to do with something we can help them do. So if I say to a child, do this, and the child doesn't do anything, I can take the child's hand and do awesome. It's amazing how quickly the children relax with that because they see that the adult can help. And also, there's this confusion because the child realizes, I didn't want to do that, and she made me do it, and she's happy. So there's no butting of heads. The third is to keep, the 4th element is to keep the interaction playful and rewarding. That should be intuitive. Just saying to a child, say B, 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 B is not fun. Tickling the child and saying the cow says moo, 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 moo all over the belly, that's going to be more fun. Tell the child what you want done, not what you don't want done. This is really good for typically developing children too. I sometimes do some consulting at a therapeutic horsemanship place, and I see children with their feet in the stirrups kicking the instructor. And the instructor saying, no kicking. What does the child hear? Kicking. And also, negation is a later developing language skill, so we shouldn't have that be part of it. Also, just in the brief time I spent at the daycare center on Friday, I could tell that there's a huge range of skill levels in communication of children with CDG. So some of your children are quite verbal, and some are quite verbal but have speech production problems, and others are not so verbal. They're having trouble getting their thoughts out. That's why everything we do should be beyond the diagnostic label. You need CDG groups and the symposiums and the consortiums, so you've got a place to learn, and you've got families, other families you can meet. But from my perspective as a speech and language therapist, it doesn't matter to me what diagnosis you walk in the door with. I'm going to try everything with you until you decide that that's not going to work for my family or my child. The 3 trials rule is something that I learned when I worked with stroke patients. If a child doesn't understand something that you've said or you don't understand what somebody says after the 3rd time, distract and move on, because it's like hitting a brick wall. The child says, gibbity-geep. You say, what? The child says, gibbity-geep. You say, huh? And the child says, gibbity-geep. And you say, wow, look at that airplane over there. Isn't that big? Let's go play. The child will get frustrated, but not as frustrated as if you keep banging their head against that wall. Try it again, show me. At a certain point, it's really not going to matter. It's time to move on. One of the other elements that you need to think about in terms of avoiding a power struggle is to always give a child 2 choices, but 2 relevant choices. If I say to a child, and I did this with my daughter when she was 4, she was crying and pouting in the car because we had to go somewhere, but she had a break, and I said, you've got 2 choices. You can sit in this car and cry, or you can come in the house and watch TV until we have to go. We lived in a very steep neighborhood, and my car was on a very steep driveway, and my daughter decided to sit in the car and wait, and I was angry, and I walked into the house and then immediately walked back out because I realized how unsafe that was to leave a 4-year-old in the car, and I could see the light bulb go on in her head, and gotcha. She's now a marriage family therapist, but she likes to think about that story a lot. I had to, by the time I got to her, now I'm angry, right? And I pull her out of the car seat and I say, in the house now. So I didn't really give her 2 choices. The 2 choices I should have given her were either get out of the car by yourself or I'll help you. Ready? 3, 2. And I always use that tone of voice with kids because it's really confusing to them because they don't want to do what you tell them to do, but they see you as being happy and they think, what happened? And then the final thing is to think in terms of counting down from 3, because we always want to follow through. So if I say to a child, point to dog, ready, 3, 2, by 1, I'm hand over hand taking their finger so that they can point to the picture of the dog. That doesn't mean they did it correctly, right? They didn't really do it at all. I made them do it with that 3, 2, 1. But it's more important to count down from 3 than count up, because what does that tell the child? She may go on forever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't get her to do it. That by then, everybody's frustrated. But if I do 3, 2, and hand over hand, 1, make sure that the child has finished what I wanted them to do, there's no argument. And typically, that behavior will become less and less, that resistant behavior. Modified sign and gestures, these are the 3 elements that are really important for Project Impact for toddlers, and it's something that I incorporate in all of my therapy. The first is communicative temptations. That means that something is within sight, but out of reach. So if I say to a parent, what does your child like to do? Nothing. That's usually what parents tell me, nothing. Does your child like videos, YouTube videos? Yeah. How does your child get them? He grabs my phone. Well, then make sure that the phone is out of the child's reach, and the child has to indicate some way, any way, either through an iPad device with a communication system, and I think Margaret Perkins is talking a little bit later, and she'll talk more about that, or use a gesture movie, or something for the phone. but some way that child has to communicate to you beyond a point, because a point is not symbolic. A point is a good form of communication to start with, but we need more iconic gestures so that there's word-finding, retrieval kinds of activities going on. My favorite is playful obstruction. That means I get between the child and what he wants, and then he needs to tell me something, and usually I teach the children to tell me to move, and then I move away. So I do this at the horseback riding place where the kids at the end of their riding the horse, they really like to feed the horses carrots, and that's what they've been taught to do. There's a big bucket of carrots, and then there's a little pail, and they're supposed to transfer some carrots over. I block their access to the big bucket, and they look at me like I'm nuts. And then I say, oh, you want me to move? And then I'll take their hand and say, move, and then I walk away, and they get the carrots. They look very confused, but usually by the third time, they're giggling and think it's really funny. And the last one is inadequate portions. That's not one of my favorites. I've only been able to do that a little bit with popcorn. A child will say, I'll say, what do you want to eat? He'll say popcorn. I give him one kernel. Then he's got to ask for more popcorn. And the strategies that I use in developing gestures, and I'm a big fan of gestures, and this came up yesterday too, what'll happen if we use a communication mechanism other than speech? Will that mean that a child will not speak because he'll take the lazier way out? There's an innate desire in all humans to communicate, and no child is going to choose to use a device or gesture instead of speaking. This is used to jumpstart the communication process. So we want to select words and a vocabulary that's highly valuable to the family, but mostly valuable to the child. If your child hates taking a bath, then bath wouldn't be a good gesture to use for them because they don't like it. But if they like blowing bubbles, use that. Anything that's going to grab their attention and keep them connected. I pair all words with simple motor movements. I don't use American Sign Language primarily because our children are not communicating with the deaf and hard of hearing. Oh, okay. I'm on slide 8. That's not good. So you want to synchronize each gesture to pair with a syllable because we want to work on the motor planning part of speech. So I'll do blow, bubbles, throw, ball, fly, butterfly. We want to get that motor planning very early on with the children, and we don't know how they're going to learn it. And I'm going to go through these really fast. We've already talked about this. We want to avoid using more, want, or please, and those are typically the first words that kids are taught. Please doesn't mean anything to a child who's having trouble developing language. Want is a very overused verb, and it can go with any object. I want the ball, I want a cookie, I want you to leave. Everything goes with want, and more is, we've seen horrific overgeneralization of more, because a child will learn more. They don't really know what it means, but they know when they ask for it, they'll get it. So we don't want to use that. I'm not going to show you my video, sorry. And you do, like I said, you will get these handouts. This is an example of how you develop a functional vocabulary. You think about good activities with your child when you're feeling good. You've got to be feeling good about that interaction. If you're exhausted and you've had a really stressful day, let's say you've gone to 15 million doctor's appointments, that's not a good time to play with your child and work on language. It's got to be 5 minutes when you're really feeling great and you really want to interact with your child. Pick the activity, find an action word that will help you promote that activity, and an object. Push car, eat cracker. And then always wait. Children can take up to 45 seconds to find, or even more, but the longest I've ever had is a child who took 45 seconds to find a word. That's a really long time. But as adults, what we tend to do is go straight to the model and say, oh, you want to eat a cracker, say cracker, say cracker, say cracker, say cracker, the child will just say cracker. That doesn't mean he found how to find the word, and it doesn't prove anything in terms of the word retrieval. And I'm going to skip the hierarchy of prompts. That's really more for therapists. Sound imitation play. Remember I said that you can't ask a child to do something you can't help them do. A lot of children with motor planning difficulties will get really frustrated if you say A, say A, say A, come on, say A. I can't, or I don't want to. So instead, I make sure that every sound I want the child to make is paired with a gesture. A, E, I, O, oo. And somebody, I think it was you, who would ask me to put it on YouTube. There's no real magic to it, but it really allows me to get the child to do what I want him to do. I'm going to real quickly go to the video and just show you a piece of it so you get an idea of what that looks like. Good job, David. Put it in. And put it.
Not that one.
Wow. Let's try this. Ready? Yeah, that was good. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yay! Good boy. Put it in. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is engagement in play and music. This is a small group that I ran. I do this at San Diego State every summer. We want to make sure that the key words are the words that the kids really like. I'm just going to show you what this looks like, and that should be good enough. Spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. The hardest part of that is teaching adults to shut up for a while. But it's really cute because the kids are looking around the room like, none of you are going to say that? I'm going to have to say it? And then they do. These are just some real quick things to think about. You need to speak up to your child's therapist. Don't be afraid to. I have a feeling none of you are. But make sure that you're approaching them and you're advocating, because you know you've got to advocate for your services for your child forever. You've got to speak up and be heard. We use the PACT ACEs approach to teach therapists how to talk to parents. I'm turning it around and telling you how to use it to therapists. Use collaborative language. Don't give up. If you can't get what you need from your service coordinator, you go to the unit manager. Speech and language services are only paid for up to the age of 3 through regional centers, but you can fight for it, and if you didn't get it at the right time, you have a right to get compensatory hours. Don't quote me. How to ask questions. Make sure you write things down. I think you've already all are doing this. Ask if you can share your questions later. Share your goals with for your child, and this is just one parent's perspective, but I learned so much in listening to her.
Every single therapist she's going to have is going to leave, and that's a horrible thing to say, but it's true. Everybody's going to go. This is a very fluid, therapists change all the time. People move different places. I mean, just watch any speech center and you're going to watch the therapist going in and out. Any ABA provider, people go in and out. I am the only person who's going to be there for her. That's it. Everybody else took off. I'm the only one. I better be as educated as they are, because I can't count on you to be there for her next year and fight for her at the IEP. I better know what you know right now so I can go into the IEP even without you. So I think that's the thing that I don't see a lot of therapists understand. Why do you do this? Why are you doing this? Well, because you may not be here tomorrow and I can't count on you. And I don't mean that you don't know your job. I don't mean that. I just mean life happens. You're going to move. You don't know when it's coming. I need to plan for it.
This was, we did interviews in 2005 with 7 different families, and we asked them to reflect back on what the early start process was like and what they would like providers to know, so we could teach providers how to be better providers. And this was very instrumental in my thinking since 2005. And then I'm done. Whew. Okay.